Good evening, everyone, and welcome. As you might guess, I'm not Eric Elness, as listed in your program this evening. In fact, he's been ill this week, so we send him our best. But I assure you that he's sorry to miss this event, and he likewise does send you his greetings. Welcome to Countryside Church is what he would have said, and so I'm saying that for him now. And in fact, I welcome you also to, of course, the Center for Faith Studies event. We're so pleased to see all of you here tonight for the final event in our 2012-2013 lecture series, By This Way of Life. We also welcome all of you who are watching online right now through the Darkwood Brew opportunity. Many of you in this room are from Countryside, but even more of you are perhaps from the greater community around us. Since 2004, we have enjoyed welcoming participants from surrounding states, as well as significant numbers of attendees from other parts of Omaha, Lincoln, Columbus, Hastings, Grand Island, and other nearby towns. It was our goal in 2004 at the launch of the lecture series project to host one keynote lecture per year. We started that first year with Rabbi Harold Kushner, and it was a dynamite way to start, I might add. But from there, the enthusiasm and the opportunities grew to such a point that we were actually able to sponsor 11 lecture events this year. Since our project began, in total, we have hosted 66 presentations here and over 22,000 attendees. Tonight, we welcome number 66 in this lineup, Dr. Mary Pipher and her husband, Jim, who come from just down the road a piece in Lincoln. Please help me welcome her and Jim. Wave your hands. Yay. This would be a good time to ask you, too, to silence your cell phones. And if anyone needs the restroom, they're out through the double doors and to the left. Go all the way to the far wall, and you'll see the restrooms on your left again. Many of these special events I've mentioned have been made possible through your donations, to be sure, and so I thank you for that tonight. If you were able to make a donation and help us, we appreciate that. But we also enjoy co-sponsorships. We seek and enjoy from other groups and institutions here in Omaha. Not only does this grease the wheels financially for us, but there are shared opportunities then for leadership, promotion, input, and outcomes, which become important aspects of our planning. For that, we are deeply grateful to other groups and individuals who have had faith in this series and the opportunities it affords for education, reflection, inclusivity, community building, and faith development. The Nature Conservancy, as well as the Omaha Zoo Foundation, found topics and themes in the Green Boat to be important in their concerns for Earth's creatures and places, and they were eager to be promotional sponsors for our Mary Pipher event this evening, and I thank them deeply. Tonight, Dr. Pipher will share deeply personal stories with us, letting her experiences shine a light into our own lives, perhaps. While we're not offering a time for Q&A this time, Mary will be ready to sign books and join in conversation with you over cake and cookies. Please let Mary leave the sanctuary first so that she can be ready to greet you in the commons area, and the signing table will be just to the left out there. Dr. Pipher, it says in her biography, has a special area of interest in how American culture affects the mental health of its people. If you think about the books she's written, you can surely see that theme. It is true that I have interest in the same areas as well, perhaps not as our American culture affects mental health of its people, but maybe more how it affects our religious and spiritual life, our love of God, love of neighbor, and love of self, love of the earth and all of its creatures. I have always been fascinated in pursuing just what makes people tick, as it pertains especially to religion, how we treat each other, and how we talk about big ideas. Tonight, Mary certainly wrestles with some of those big ideas. Sue Monk Kidd, who is very wise, and perhaps you know her as an author, has also spoken here twice. She once said, quote, "There is a time when you are simply seized by tenderness for the world. That's all. When you come home to it, when you decide you want your work to serve some part of that, too." Please help me welcome Dr. Mary Pipher to tell us another one of her amazing stories.
Greetings, everyone. I thank Cindy Kugler, who's so wonderful to work with, and Countryside Community Church. I'm very happy I got to come back here. I came here one time and I had such a good experience that when Jim and I were talking about where I would give this talk in Omaha, I didn't even think about it. I want to come back to this church. So thank you for hosting me again. It's an honor to be part of this speaker series. I'm glad the bookworm's here. They've always worked with me when I sell books in Omaha. And I thank all of you for coming out on a hot summer night. It's hard to compete with summertime, so I'm really glad you're here tonight. I'm going to talk for probably about 40 minutes about some of the ideas in the new book, and I'll just read you roughly 3 or 4 pages of it toward the end. The subtitle of that book is Reviving Ourselves in Our Capsized Culture. And it's about how to transform our fear, sorrow, and grief about enormous global problems, such as global climate change, into action, community, bliss, and empowerment. And in this book, I essentially make an argument for civic engagement. I make no promises about saving the planet, but what I do promise is there are some ways we can save ourselves and feel healthy and vibrant in this world as it is right now. I struggled preparing this speech. Nobody really wants to think about these issues, and I want everyone who comes here tonight to have fun, have a good time, and a good experience as you listen to me. And with this topic, it's a challenge to figure out how to make that happen. But I'm going to start with the most difficult material. I won't stay with difficult material very long. I'll quickly move into heartening information. So please put up with me for just a little bit, and there will be a turning in this speech, quite early in this speech. Isaac Denison wrote, "All sorrow can be borne if put into a story." And I'd like to begin with my story that led to writing this book. In the summer of 2010, which many of you remember here in Nebraska, I experienced what environmentalists call the Ohshit Moment. At that time, the Earth was experiencing its warmest decade, its warmest year, and the warmest April, May, and June on record. In Pakistan, it hit a record high of 129 degrees. In Russia, it was 111, and the peat bogs caught fire. In July, the heat index in Lincoln reached 115 degrees for several days in a row. And it seemed that our planet and all living beings were literally gasping for breath. In July, I read Bill McKibben's book, Earth, which is spelled EAARTH, in which he argues that the Earth as we know it has already vanished. He postulates we now live on a new planet, Earth, with a rapidly changing ecology. He argues that without immediate action, our familiar ways of life will disappear, not in our grandchildren's adulthoods, but in the lifetime of middle-aged people alive today. He also writes that we don't have 50 years to save our planet, we have the next decade. None of my experiences had quite prepared me for the bleakness of this book. I couldn't stop reading it, and when I finished, I felt shell shocks. For a few days, all I could experience was despair. Everything just felt so hopeless and so over. Now, during this time, my grandchildren came to visit. And as we picked raspberries together, I thought about all the care we lavish on these children. We make sure they eat healthy foods and brush their teeth with safe toothpaste. We examine and treat every little bug bite or cat scratch. And yet, we, and by we I mean all the grandparents in the world, including myself, haven't worked to secure them a future with clean air and water and diverse, healthy ecosystems. Had we been in a trance? That summer, when I listened to my friends talk about the mundane details of life, I wanted to shout at them, "Wake up, please, wake up. Our old future is gone. Matters are urgent. We have to do something now. But after years of being a mother and a therapist, I have learned that shouting, "Wake up," doesn't work. In fact, that was one of my most dispiriting realizations, that I wanted desperately to preserve the world I loved, but I didn't even know how to talk about this fact with my closest friends. I had no idea how to bring it up. And when I did bring it up, usually I had a very bad response prior to this summer when I started to think this through very carefully. I had to find a way out of my state of mind. I couldn't survive with all that awareness every minute of the day, but I couldn't forget what I was now afraid of and understood only too well. Now, my little grandson, Coltrane, he's 3. We have this funny game. We played with him for quite some time. He loves to be frightened, but not too frightened. So Jim and I, when he's at our house and we're watching him, we're alligators, or we're sharks, or we're tigers, or we're bears, or he just saw Peter Pan right now, we're pirates a lot of the time. But when it starts getting too frightening for him, he has a magic word that immediately calls off the game, and we sort of shrivel to the floor and disappear as dangerous creatures and reemerge as his grandparents. And his magic word is abracadabra. And as soon as he says abracadabra, he's safe, that game's over, and we're doing something else. And I found myself thinking, I wish I had a word like abracadabra that I could just pull out of the hat right now and feel safe and feel I had some control of the universe. What pulled me out of my despair was the desire to get to work. I didn't know what I was going to do. I felt virtually unqualified for anything involving the environment, but I knew I had to do something. It wasn't clear how much my action would benefit the world, but I knew it would help me. I've never been able to tolerate stewing in my own anxiety. Action has always been one of the ways I heal and cure myself of dark feelings. So I invited a group of people to my house to discuss what we could do to stop TransCanada from shipping tar sand sludge through our state via the Keystone XL pipeline. We called ourselves the Coalition, and for almost 3 years now, we've met at my house, at other people's houses, in parks, and we've had potlucks. We always have fun. It's not really a meeting, it's a gathering. We always try to have fun, and we always plan actions. We have lots of laughter and hugs, and we end our meetings on a positive note with something really good planned in the future that we think might be helpful. None of us in this group had time for tedium or suffering, but we ended up liking working together for a common cause. Now, if you want to discover how the world works, try to change it, especially if these changes involve confronting the fossil fuel industry. Our campaign has been a complicated story about money, power, international corporations, and politics, but it's also been a very simple story about my friends and me working to save our state from what we call the extra leaky pipeline. This story is in the book, by the way, and I'm not going to tell most of it tonight, or really even part of it tonight, but there's some coalition members here. And would you stand if you're part of that group? I see Pipher. Who else is here? Oh, Ken is here. Helen is here. Jane is here, wonderful. Nancy's here. So this is, you can see, a representative group. And one thing I want to say about Helen, she is one of our youngest members. She's in high school here in Omaha, and she's also one of our most eloquent members. She's testified at both State Department hearings, and we often ask her to give speeches when she's available. And she can bring a crowd of 1,000 people to weeping with the eloquence of her testimony. So it's really been fun to have. How old are you right now, Helen? A 16-year-old citizen in our group. In January 2012, President Obama denied a permit for the pipeline because of concerns about Nebraska. But the outcome of this is still very uncertain. He will make a decision probably in the fall about whether to permit the XL pipeline. Our group is still working very hard to stop this pipeline. Our basic philosophy is it's not over until we give up, and we're not going to give up. And I want to tell you a reason that I'm not giving up. I have these 3 grandchildren that live in Central City, not far off the pipeline route. And one time we took them out. We're very big on educating our children to love the natural world. So one year we took them out to see the Perseid meteor showers. And we're lying along a lake watching for falling stars. And at this point, Kate was 7, Aiden was 5, and Claire was 3. And Claire was basically going, I want to see a falling star, I want to see a falling star. But she actually never looked at the sky. So whenever we'd see a falling star, she'd go, why didn't I see that falling star? Well, Claire, you've got to stop chasing frogs and lie down and look at the sky. Kate was kind of blasé about falling stars. Nana, I've seen falling stars before. So it's very nice you're excited about this, but I've done it. It's not a new experience to me. Aiden, on the other hand, he said, Nana, I want to lie beside you, and I want to hold your hand, and I want to remember that I was with you when I saw my first falling star. So then after this beautiful night of watching these stars, we're driving back toward Central City with our grandchildren, and we top a hill, and Aiden's in a car seat in the back, and he said, Nana, look at my beautiful city. Look at my beautiful city. And I was quiet for a minute, and I go, Aiden, your town is pretty. With the lights on, your little town looks real pretty right now. And he was quiet a minute, and he said, Nana, Central City is big to me, but it's small to the rest of the world. And that's when he understood that for the first time. And when I testified one time about this pipeline at our legislature, I reversed what he said. And I said, you know, Aiden Pipher may be small to TransCanada. He may be small to Obama, but he's big to me, and I'm going to take care of him. And I think there's a very personal feel that most of us have, that we're doing this for people we love. And that's been one reason we've been able to persist. Now, I want to change gears a bit and talk about all of us, not just the coalition and the pipeline fighters. Modern life is very stressful. We're bombarded by too much information, too many choices, too much complexity. One way to state our problem is our problem-solving abilities and our communication and coping skills have not evolved quickly enough to deal with the situations we're in. We have Paleolithic arousal systems, Neolithic brains, medieval institutions, and 21st century technology. And it's just a very difficult mix to work with. Right now, the more we connect the dots between events, the more frightened and overwhelmed we tend to feel. One time I took these same 3 grandchildren camping in our backyard, and Kate was the oldest. Now the other 2 are just loving it. We're only about 30 feet from our house, but they're excited, and it's pretty adventurous in our backyard. And they're listening to the peepers, and they're listening to the crickets, and they're talking about how fun it's going to be to sleep outside. And Kate's kind of going, Nana, I'm nervous. I'd rather go in the house. I don't think this was a good idea. And I kind of stupidly chided her, and I said, well, Kate, look at your little brother and sister. They're not afraid. You're a big sister. You should be the bravest. And she looked at me like, Nana, are you an idiot? And she said, they're just little kids. They're too young to be afraid. They don't know what's going on. And that's kind of how I feel sometimes, that the more we connect the dots and put things together, the more scared we feel. Now, there's a lot of evidence of this, but I just wanted to tell you 2. One's personal, and one's an interesting little statistical thing. I was talking, my dentist and I were talking, as you do with your dentist when your mouth's full of stuff, about this new book. And basically about all I could sort of get out while talking to her was it had to do with stress, the stress of the modern world. And she said, well, I want to read that book. And she said, Mary, I want to tell you something. She said, I've been a dentist now for about 25 years. And over the course of my practice, the rate of teeth grinding has stayed pretty constant. There's a certain percentage of my patients that grind their teeth. But she said in the last 3 years, the rate, the number of people who are grinding their teeth, the percentage of patients who come in and say, I'm grinding my teeth, it's quadrupled. She said, and there's really nothing to explain it but stress. More people are grinding their teeth at night because they're stressed out. I heard this report on All Things Considered. It was a man named Alex Bentley, and he'd done an enormous computer analysis of the emotional content of all printed words over the last 100 years. This study was done in 2012. His findings were very startling. First of all, contrary to what I would have expected, Americans actually used more words to convey emotion in the early part of the century than later, with one exception, which I'll get to. And the years when people had the most emotional words that had to do with joy and happiness, take a guess. 1920. The 20s, everything looked rosy. A lot of new inventions and the automobile, and the country hadn't yet slipped into depression. The words when there was the most sorrow and grief was during World War II, which makes a lot of sense, too, when you think about it. But all of these emotional words have actually decreased fairly steadily over the last 100 years, except for one word. Does anyone want to take a shot at that word? Fear. Fear. Fear words have gone up and up and up. And every year, there's a higher percentage of fear words in our language. In the last year of the study was the most fearful words they ever had in any year in the history of this country, including the year of 9/11 and so on. We all experience a certain kind of pain as we try to deal with the enormous amount of rapid inflow of information and our own feelings of powerlessness, oftentimes, about that information. We also experience the pain of the earth and the suffering of people and animals all over the world. And environmentalist Joanna Macy has a lovely phrase for this. She calls it planetary anguish, which is deeper than our own personal pain. We want to help, and yet we all feel like we have enough on our plates without taking on the melting polar ice caps or the dying oceans. We're busy. A lot of us are already pretty tired and overwhelmed. I have an example of this from Jim in my life. We had this 1 week when I was writing this book, and at that time I was reading all the scientific books. I really wanted to have this science down. And it was pretty dismal reading. And on the other hand, we had a week when all of our appliances seemed to go out at once. A tree hit our air conditioning unit and destroyed it. Our dishwasher wasn't working. And all of a sudden, our refrigerator, which we'd bought a year ago, seemed to be on the blink. And so one night, Jim asked me, would you like to sit and have a glass of wine before dinner? And I go, well, yeah, I'll sit down and talk to you as long as you don't talk about the fate of the earth. And Jim goes, I don't even want to talk about the fate of our appliances, and so true, Now, this denial is partly cultural. These crises are so enormous that the scope often exceeds our human and cultural resilience systems. Thinking about these problems, it's like trying to count 2 billion pinto beans. It's just beyond the integrity of our minds as they're so constituted. Oftentimes, we don't know how to respond, so we don't respond. And we develop what psychologists call learned helplessness, which, by the way, has a very strong depression component. And as many of you know, there's a lot of people on antidepressants in this culture. And our sense that we are powerless becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you believe you are powerless, you are powerless because you don't do anything about situations. You don't think you have any possibility of impacting. We also live in a culture of denial. Dr. Kari Norgaard, a sociologist who has studied this in our country, said, "The denial of global warming is socially constructed. In America, it's almost as if relevant information about global climate change is classified. Our national policy toward the devastation we face is, don't ask, don't tell." Now, this is one of the things that really motivated me to write this book. I'm a therapist, and I'm quite familiar with resistance, denial, the kinds of ways people avoid dealing with unpleasant truths. I mean, that's most of the work of therapy. In fact, people don't come into therapy and say, I have a terrible problem, I need to stop drinking, and have their therapist go, well, I think that's a good idea. I agree you have a terrible problem. Go forth and stop drinking. It just doesn't work that way. Now, there's a book that gave me a very good sense for what the situation is. It was written by a psychologist named Stanley Cohen called States of Denial. And he studied Germany and the denial of the Holocaust at the time it happened. And he talked about a state he called knowing/not knowing that arises in ongoing traumatic situations. This, in quotes, willful ignorance, in quotes, occurs when information cannot be totally denied because it's too obvious, but it cannot be totally integrated because it's too painful, and there's no good way to do it. And that's the state I think we're in as individuals and a culture as we try to get our arms and our institutions around this. Even the manner in which we talk about it is very odd. We don't talk about believing in the law of aerodynamics or the DNA code or faraway galaxies. By now, the evidence is overwhelming for global climate change, and the scientific community is almost unanimously united. But we still speak of it as if believing in global climate change, we were talking about, do you believe in extraterrestrials, for example? So one of the reasons I wanted to write this book is I wanted to change the conversation from a very tired, unproductive conversation to a conversation of how do we organize ourselves to protect ourselves and our planet. And by the way, a very heartening little bit of information is last week, Governor Dave Heinemann, who has not been a great educator on global climate change in this state, actually signed a bill to study global climate change in our state. And I see that as a great step forward in terms of us coming to some grips with these issues. Now, all cultures have rules about what can be discussed and what can't. And this business of global climate change reminds me of an old joke about the Soviet Union. So here's the joke. Two KGB men were walking together down a street, and one of them said to the other, this is during the most repressive Stalinist time, "What do you think of this system?" And the other one goes, "Oh, I don't know. I guess I probably think about the same thing you do. In that case," said the first man, "I'm going to have to arrest you." You know, denial is simply a human emotion. We all have a healthy and understandable desire to avoid feeling pain. We want to savor the shrimp cocktail without thinking about ruined mango groves, or read a book to children about lions without wondering how many lions are left in the wild. Yet we cannot solve a problem that we will not face. With awareness, on the other hand, almost everything might be possible. James Baldwin has a wonderful quote about this. "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed that is not faced." It's a very good summary of this point. So, when a problem is too big for us, I think there's only one solution, and that is to grow bigger. That is the solution to a problem that's too big for us. And in the book, I talk about this I talk about despair being a crucible for growth. Many people know this from their own experience. And I talk about what I call a transcendent response, which is reorganizing yourself somewhat in response to awareness and acceptance of a certain amount of pain and more clarity about reality, and then figuring out a way to respond that actually improves not only the issue that you're concerned about, but it improves your own quality of life. So, for example, one of the transcendent responses I recommend heartily in this book is action, that people do something to help. And for example, starting a group, the way you can start a group is if you have one friend and 2 chairs, you can invite your friend over for a cup of tea and have a discussion and call yourself a group. It's amazingly easy to start a group. When we were working on this stuff, a funny thing happened. People had come up to us and they'd go, we have such a ill-placed regard for celebrity in this culture. They'd come up and they'd go, well, have you thought about inviting Ted Turner? I hear he's an environmentalist, or Leonardo DiCaprio, or some celebrity that had voiced some interest in this cause. And our group learned to say, we're talking to you. We're talking to you. You can do something. And that's one of my beliefs. There's nobody outside of us in this room, who's going to save us. We're going to do the work to save ourselves if that work gets done. There's no celebrity, there's no power. It's going to be us. And one of the things, by the way, I think that makes people much more likely to be engaged in civic action and participate in efforts to make a difference is if they actually have what I call actionable intelligence. You know, if you listen to the radio and you read the newspaper and you hear, oh, there's acidification of the oceans, or the polar ice caps are melting, or we've now reached 400 parts per million CO2 level, you're just likely to feel, oh my goodness, this is terrible. But it's probably going to stay with you in some form like depression or despair. So one of the things I really like to do when I'm talking, I like local work where you have resources and people to help you and you actually know what's going on in your area and have people around you who are very invested in that particular issue. And I also like what I call actionable intelligence that gives people a really good idea. Well, if you care about this, what could you do about it tomorrow? And one of the things that I really like is almost whenever I give a speech, it'll probably happen tonight, or I just did, one day last week, I did 12 radio interviews on this book. It's called a radio tour. And people would go, well, what should we do? What should we do? And first of all, my response to that is always, do what you love to do. Margaret Mead said there's an ideal culture has a place for every human gift. I think the same with improving the world. Any human gift you have, any passion you have, there's a place for it. There's a way you can find something to do. And I'll just give you a couple examples. I have a friend, Kelly, and she got very concerned about what appears to be a serious possibility of extinction of the monarchs. Well, how many of you know what monarchs need to stay alive? Milkweed. That's an essential ingredient in the life cycle of a monarch. And one of the reasons, there's many, but one reason they're having trouble staying alive is a lot of milkweed is now being used in cornfields or plowed under for developments and so on and so on. So she had this idea. She got an op-ed published in the Des Moines Register to this effect, and she's now made a YouTube video to spread her very simple little idea that all over the country, one place we could have a lot of milkweed planted is in cemeteries. That there's a lot of places around a cemetery you might be able to plant milkweed. She even bought a cemetery plant for herself and planted a bunch of milkweed. It can use it until she needs it. So that's an example. I was a member of a group, Pip is here, she was in that group. We called ourselves the Apple Pie Brigade. And we had this idea that we'd take Governor Heinemann. This was when he was very disengaged from this whole issue. And at the time we were doing this, there was not one law on the books in this state to protect us from pipelines. No safety laws, no inspection laws, no liability laws. And we wanted our governor to be more engaged. So a bunch of nanas like me and women my age, we'd go down to the governor's mansion with muffins and little bouquets of wildflowers and these little thank you in advance letters. Well, finally, I think we just bugged him to the point he agreed to meet with us. We'd been wanting a meeting, but it took a long time to get it. But at this meeting, we told the governor, if you do what you need to do to protect our state, we're going to bake you an apple pie. And it's going to be one of the best apple pies. So here you see there's a use for someone who can bake an apple pie. There's a use for someone who can do an op-ed. We found a lot of use for people who could build things, for artists, for people who can talk, for people who can call some people together, for people who can fix bicycles. There's all kinds of ways you can get engaged in this particular work. Another antidote to despair is amazement. I want to quote Hannah Tennant Moore, who said, "It took me a long time to learn that being miserable does not alleviate the world's misery." Now, I had a day one time, this is probably a couple years ago. I can't even remember the details of the week, but suffice it to say it was a rough week. And when Saturday morning came, I was just frazzled and not centered and kind of probably irritable. And I realized I need to do something. And I knew what I needed to do as soon as I realized that. I drove out to Spring Creek Prairie, a prairie near Lincoln where I live. And it was kind of springtime. And, you know, there was still ice on the pond. I happened to see a mink out skating on that pond. But I could go and lie down in the grass, which had been warmed by the sun, and look up through that tall grass, that blue stem, and see snow geese and geese flying overhead. And I just lay out there for a really long time. And I started being all right again. In fact, I do in my driveway after the Newton, Connecticut shootings. It was winter. But I took a sleeping bag and I went out and I lay down on my driveway and I looked at the stars because I just had this sense I need something bigger than me to help me absorb these kind of body blows. One of my friends, I'm lucky I live by a prairie. We're all lucky we live in a beautiful state with lots of rural land. But everybody has the sky. And one time I was with my friend Sherry and I said, "Boy, it's a beautiful sky tonight." And she goes, "I've never seen an ugly sky. Have you ever seen an ugly sky?" And then I realized, well, probably I haven't if I try to think about that. Another thing that is very good is to have contact with animals. Animals can make you so happy. And one of the things animals do is they live in the present. They aren't begrudging events from the past. They aren't stewing about the future. One time I took a walk with my friend Marge and her dog Leo, and at the end of this walk, Leo was almost embarrassing. He was so happy. He's kind of on his back, kind of lolling around with his legs in the air and just his tongue's rolled out, and he's just, whatever ecstasy is in a dog, he was experiencing it. And Margie winked at me, and she said, "If you want to know what time it is, ask a dog, and a dog will tell you now, now, now." So pets can be a lot of fun. And then, from my point of view, the most important transcendent response is what I call developing your own moral imagination, which is the ability to understand how the world looks and feels to other people. It involves motivation, discernment, heart, imagination. And from my point of view, this is probably my core value, the purpose of life is to grow our moral imaginations and to help other people grow theirs, so that by the time we die, if we're lucky, our circle of caring includes all living beings. And there's people who have done this, whether it's a Gandhi or a Thich Nhat Hanh or a Nelson Mandela or a Mother Teresa. We have Francis of Assisi. We probably have many examples of this. So I was trying to help these pesky grandchildren I've referred to develop their moral imaginations. And I've got Claire, Aiden, and Kate. And I play them this little song by Philip Hoos. It's called Hey Little Ant. And it's a dialogue between a boy on the schoolyard whose friends want him to squish an ant. They've been squishing ant. And the ant is talking to him. And he's going, I want to squish you. It's fun to squish ants. My friends are watching me. And the ant's going, but my life is as valuable to me as yours is to you. And I have a wife and a family too. So they argue this through a couple of choruses. And then the last verse of this little song is, should the ant get squished? Should the ant go free? It's up to the kid, not up to me. We'll leave that boy with the raised up shoe. Now, what do you think that he should do? Well, these children were very interested in their responses. So Kate goes, Nana, I will never, I don't think I ever have, but I will never squish an ant again. Aiden goes, Nana, even when I'm with my friends who squish ants, I won't do it again. So little Claire, she's real quiet, and she doesn't volunteer anything. So I give her a minute to pipe in, and then I go, well, Claire, what about you? How would you answer this? Are you ever going to squish an ant again? And she says, well, I mean, you could tell she didn't really want to tell me. She goes, well, Nana, all I can promise you is this. I never will squish a talking ant again. So she has a little work to do on her moral imagination. Well, I want to read you a couple little readings and then say a concluding thing. I didn't know how to read from this book. I don't know, anything would have been all right. But this is a little bit on the moral, where I write about the moral imagination in the largest sense, not in terms of our individual development, but in terms of our species and the place the human race is. So I'll read you a couple pages of this. We are living in fragmented ways, disconnected from not only each other and the natural world, but from our pasts and our futures. These interconnected problems are at their roots relationship problems. We have a disordered relationship with the web of life. Healing will involve reweaving the most primal of connections to this sacred web. Interconnection can be seen as a spiritual belief, as in Buddhism, but also as a scientific fact. As Jeremy Rifkin writes in The Empathic Civilization, we are learning that the earth functions like an invisible organism. We are the various cells of one living body. Those who work to save the earth are its antibodies. Whether we like it or not, we are all in this together. As Gregory Bateson reminds us, the unit of survival is the individual and its environment. Enlightened self-interest should make environmentalists of us all. When we destroy an old-growth forest, we lose many plant and animal species that could be of great use to humans fighting diseases. If the rainforests go, the planet loses its lungs, and we will all die. When the insects disappear, how do we plan to survive? We humans don't know how to pollinate fruit. The distinction that English makes between humans and their environment encourages a disordered kind of thinking. A sense of separation is implied even by the word nature. People often speak as if they were not part of nature, as if nature were rather something to use, control, or enjoy. But we can't fix the earth the way we fix a car or a dishwasher. We are the earth. We are a vital part of an organic whole. Thich Nhat Hanh talks about this dualism in this way. He said we need to move beyond the idea of environment and fall back in love with our mother. So that's a little bit there. And then I'm going to read you just about a page where I discuss the title of this book. Are you good for about 3 more minutes? This book's title, The Green Boat, comes from the name my husband Jim and I gave our boat-shaped piece of land. Our house sits atop a dam that overlooks the city park. From our deck, we can watch the sun and moon rise over the lake. Great storms roll in from the south and west and explode over us as they move toward the Missouri. The ducks, geese, and pelicans come through in the fall and spring. In the summer, a great blue heron couple nests in the reeds at the south end of the lake. When I work in my garden, I hear the songs of meadowlarks and kingbirds. Bikers and hikers use the trail, and fishermen catch perch and bluegill. On weekends, parades of kayaks, sailboats, and canoes crisscross our lake. On snowy nights, a red fox comes to hunt on the dam. He looks as if he is dancing. In the winter, we watch as children sled on the dam and skate and play hockey on the lake. In their bright coats, they resemble confetti swirling on soft white frosting. At night, from the warmth of our living room, we observe the ice fishermen with their insulated clothing, tiny lighted huts, and bottles of whiskey. The Green Boat is a small but rich ecosystem that gives us great joy. We know how lucky we are to live here. Jim and I try to share this good place with others, so it's not just our green boat, but rather the communal property of everyone. We share what Martin Luther King Jr. called the inescapable network of mutuality. If a bird dies here, we bury him. When our friend needs a quiet green place to relax, we invite them over. If it is time for a celebration, what better place than under the Nebraska sky, surrounded by trees and water? Most of us take care of what we love, and we grow to love what we take care of. Every place has the potential to be beautiful and filled with love, in other words, sacred. Our blue and gold and green planet is indeed a Noah's Ark of sorts, with over 7 billion people and billions more plants and animals. If we don't sail carefully and tend to those on board, we will perish. If we manage to keep our boat afloat, our world can sail on, not as it is today, but in a more joyous, peaceful, and beautiful way. Thank you, thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, thank you. May I say just 2 more paragraphs? But stand by me.
Oh, I'm sorry. You were.
I just want to, you know what? I'm wordy. I apologize. In our great hominid journey, nobody knows what time it is. We could be at the end or the beginning of a great and glorious turning towards reconnection and wholeness. We who are alive today share what Martin Luther King called the inescapable network of mutuality. We are not without resources. We have our intelligence, humor, compassion, family, and friends, and our ancestry of resilient hominid ancestors. We can be restored. I thank you very much, and thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary, for your book and your presentation and your humor. Thank you, Jim, for working with you. They're great to work with to come here. And thank you all for coming. And as soon as they are situated out there, I invite you all to join them and each other.
But
Hello.
not yet.
Oops.
I'm Chris Alexander. I'm one of the pastors here at Countryside, and I want to thank Cindy Kugler for wonderful years of service developing and expanding the Center for Faith Studies and all that she's done. This is her last event. She's retiring after tonight. So please join me in thanking her for all of her service.
Thank you. Oh, thank you. Oh, my gosh. Oh, thank you, everyone. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. That is a special surprise. I appreciate it. I want to assure you that the Center for Faith Studies is going to continue. It might be a good place to put the word out again, too, that I hear they are going to put in place an interim director first. And we're casting a wide net in the community for people to consider that job. It's a part-time position, and you can get more information from Chris or from calling the church. That will happen soon, and then they'll, I believe, putting a search committee in place for a permanent director at some point. But meanwhile, the Center for Faith Studies is alive and well and going to go great places next year, too. So we look forward to seeing more of you at those events next year. Thank you.